The Geometry of Power, From the Louvre to Yerevan. Article by Heghine Pilosyan, published on February 6, 2026 on EVN Report. Power leaves a mark on the ground long before it leaves one in history. For centuries, political authority has expressed itself not only through institutions or laws, but through the reshaping of urban form. Streets are widened, irregular districts removed, and perspectives opened toward buildings that embody the ruling order. In these contexts, architecture functions as a means of consolidating control. Power materialized. Patterns of palatial gentrification. Nearly 2 centuries before Pei's glass pyramid was discreetly set into the Cour Napoleon, a gesture of surgical precision designed not to disturb the Louvre's many-layered facades, another architect, under the authority of the state, had sought to clear that same space of irregular buildings. The transformation of the Louvre's courtyards across centuries and regimes illustrates how the relationship between architecture and power evolved. Louis XIV's monarchy proclaimed, "L'État, c'est moi," yet lacked legal instruments to seize land. Napoleon III's empire, by contrast, possessed both the means and the will to act. What had once depended on royal persuasion and negotiated acquisition became administrative procedure. Authority to reorder the city shifted from symbolic absolutism to bureaucratic efficiency, expressed not in ceremony, but in law. The Louvre exemplifies what Louis Mumford described as the city's role as a theater of social action. Urban space became a tool of political expression, constructed through voids as much as buildings, where hierarchies were made visible through built form. Across 19th century Europe, regimes that attained stability and surplus, whether absolutist, imperial, or bourgeois, reshaped their capitals in similar ways, clearing irregular quarters, opening grand perspectives, and erecting architecture commensurate with their newly asserted power. Paris, Vienna, and St. Petersburg became, in Spiro Kostov's terms, diagrams of power, facades aligned with rule, avenues radiating from seats of government, and monumental voids replacing the crowded informality of medieval towns. Urban form emerged as a language of legitimacy. From monarchy to modernity, the Soviet recasting. In the 20th century, this impulse resurfaced under a different political and economic order. The Soviet state, conceived as the antithesis of the Tsarist monarchy, possessed the administrative capacity to rebuild entire cities. Yet its spatial expression of ideology drew on familiar architectural forms, monumental, axial, and neoclassical. As Manfredo Tafuri observed, architecture in such moments stops reflecting politics neutrally. It becomes its operative instrument, a means of aestheticizing authority. Stalin's empire style fused classical grandeur with socialist narrative, producing a hybrid language of prestige and progress. The 1935 General Plan for Moscow envisioned concentric avenues converging on monumental squares. Roughly contemporaneous with the New Deal in the United States and fascist master plans in Rome and Berlin, it combined centralized authority with classical symmetry. The Seven Sisters, skyscraper palaces, were secular cathedrals to labor and state, technologically modern yet formally retrospective. Geometry once again served authority rather than neutral expression. Yerevan, a provincial capital recast. Alexander Tamanyan's 1924 master plan for Yerevan translated these ambitions to a smaller provincial scale. The old town was replaced by a rational, axial, and monumental structure centered on a circular core, the future Republic Square. Its concentric rings and radiating avenues echoed neoclassical precedents and Haussmannian urbanism in form, though not in political intent. Dense vernacular quarters, caravanserais, and bazaars, deemed Oriental in official documents, were gradually demolished in the 1920s to 1930s to make way for this new order. It was a local echo of the state-led clearances that had reshaped European capitals a century earlier. Between the 1930s and 1950s, Yerevan's reconstruction entered its fully Stalinist phase. The government house, the opera and ballet theater, and later the Academy of Sciences, adopted the monumental forms, colonnades, axial symmetry, and ornamented stone facades. Armenian tuff and pink stone lent warmth, softening the rigidity of the imported style. Older quarters along the Hrazdan Gorge were leveled. Wide avenues were cut through, vistas framed toward Mount Ararat. These interventions, justified as collective modernization, relied on compulsory acquisition, a precursor to the modern eminent domain. Yerevan's center became a civic palace, monumental, ceremonial, and collectively possessed. In the logic of 20th century planning, every spatial diagram carried with it an implicit diagram of power. Prefabricated housing districts, Ajapnyak, Arabkir, Shengavit, replaced the monumental stone city. The Grand Center remained the stage set of civic identity, even as daily life migrated to the peripheries. This duality of neoclassical heart and socialist periphery still defines Yerevan's physical form. Private capital and post-Soviet continuities. At the turn of the 21st century, Yerevan entered a new cycle of state-enabled, private capital urbanism. The emblem was Northern Avenue, a long-planned axial cut through the historic center, realized through land consolidation, auctions of development rights, and stone-clad commercial housing. Its facades, with arches, pediments, and rhythmic colonnades, revived a decorative classicism over reinforced concrete frames. The project displaced large sections of the older urban fabric. In intent and effect, these interventions echoed earlier episodes of palatial consolidation, refracted through a post-Soviet mode of facadism and speculative prestige. A similar logic resurfaced after 2018 in the proposed redevelopment of the Firdousi district. There, a seemingly transformative change in political leadership nonetheless produced designs grounded in classical inflected monumentalism. The architectural form endured even where the politics claimed rupture. In the same period, parcels long understood as public land moved into private hands. In Victory Park, a 1.7-hectare plot privatized in 2006 was restored to the state in 2023. In Nornork, part of Nansen Park passed directly to a private owner. And in the Hrazdan Gorge, long-term leases and unauthorized construction left significant areas in legal and ecological uncertainty. The resulting estates often adopt a conspicuously palatial visual language: domes, colonnades, heavy ornament, less a revival of the Second Empire than a post-Soviet eclecticism, where classical motifs function chiefly as markers of status rather than of historical reference. Oligarchic villas on the hillsides, described by local journalists as palatial residences with gold-encrusted domes and marble walls, extend this logic further. The mechanism is familiar: land of ambiguous status reconstituted as private grandeur. The ideological frame, however, has shifted decisively, from monarchical prerogative through socialist collectivism to the primacy of private capital. The stylistic grammar of monumentality persists, even as its tools move from decree to contractual title. What emerges is not liberalization, but continuity, clearance, consolidation, and facade-driven monumentality recast as development. The persistence of form. The methods of urban transformation have remained consistent across changing ideologies and regimes. What shifted were the instruments used to consolidate land, the forms of authority that sanctioned these actions, and the architectural styles that gave them meaning. From royal expropriation to socialist centralization to neoliberal privatization, each regime translated power into lasting spatial order. Under the past regimes, land was claimed through decree or persuasion. This produced ordered courts, formal axes, and monumental squares. Monumentality functioned as both tool and display. Architecture made hierarchy visible. Under socialism, private ownership gave way to administrative control. Informal quarters were cleared. Neoclassical, monumental architecture projected the state's moral authority. Yerevan's reconstructed core, with its circular form and civic axes, expressed this ambition: a civic palace for a collective sovereign. As the logic of the market replaced that of the plan, authority shifted from administration to capital. Leases, tenders, and development contracts replaced decrees, yet the underlying gesture remained familiar: consolidation, displacement, display. In Yerevan, eminent domain, once a legal justification for collective needs, persisted as a bridge between public and private interest, invoked to legitimize redevelopment projects that often served neither. The resulting architecture produced a neo-empire eclecticism that extended the monumental vocabulary of earlier regimes, but redirected it toward signaling private status rather than public authority. Across these transformations, the continuity lies not in style, but in intent. Each regime, whatever its ideology, sought to render its authority spatially coherent, to make power appear orderly, rational, and inevitable. Mumford's theater of social action still stands, though the cast and script have changed. What was once performed by the crown or the state is now staged by capital, each using architecture as its instrument of persuasion. Pei's glass pyramid, placed at the center of this long narrative, marks not a rupture, but an evolution. Where earlier regimes imposed order through demolition, his intervention achieved it through precision and transparency. Yet even this measured gesture belongs to the same lineage: the reconciliation of power with visibility, the pursuit of order as a sign of legitimacy. From the royal courtyard to the socialist square and the privatized boulevard, architecture endures as a medium of persuasion, altered in method, refined in language, but constant in intent.